The dog came first, a lean cattle mutt with a torn ear and a coat the color of rotted wheat, trotting along the wind-cut ridge above the canyon flats. His name was Bristle, and he moved like he had somewhere to be, ribs showing through the dust-matted fur, muzzle dark with dried blood from a fight the night before. He'd outlived two owners and was halfway to being wild again, a ghost among the range, sniffing for anything warm, anything breathing. That morning he caught a scent that didn't fit. It wasn't coyote or cow or man. It wasn't death either, not yet. It was blood, old and metallic, but beneath it, something stubborn. Something that stirred his memory of a campfire voice calling down to him in the cold dark. He angled down the slope with his ears flat, stepping careful over stones, following that faint, stubborn scent. She lay in a drift of red dust where the prairie turned to shale, arms out like she'd fallen from the sky. Her dress was torn, faded calico, stuck to her skin with sweat and dirt. Her lips were cracked, her eyes shut. Blood stained the ground under her right hip where the wound had soaked through her slip. She looked half dead but not yet all the way. And Bristle, who had once guarded cattle and bitten rustlers' boots, lowered his nose and whimpered once. He nosed at her shoulder, then growled low, turning in a frantic circle, pawing at the earth. The girl stirred barely. A wheeze broke from her lips. She was maybe 17, maybe 20. Her face was sunburned, freckles blotched into a smear. Her left eye opened, white showing all around the iris. She looked at the dog without focus. "Don't go," she rasped. "Don't leave me." The mutt stayed. By sundown, Bristle had gone to fetch the only man he still called his own. That man was Colt March, a cattle rider with a ruined hand and a house made of rustwood slats. He lived alone out past Deadman's Draw with no one but the dog and the wind for company. Colt didn't smile anymore. He rarely spoke. Folks said he'd left something behind in the war, or maybe it had been taken from him. No one asked what. He drank coffee in the morning and whiskey when the sun dipped. Bristle was the only living thing he'd let sleep near his bed. When the dog showed up whining at the gate, Colt stepped off the porch without a word. He followed him into the dusk, rifle slung across his back. The air was close, thick with a coming storm. Lightning flashed once over the canyon. They found her curled in on herself under a bluff where the night wind couldn't reach. Colt crouched beside her, brushed the hair from her face, then tore off a strip of his shirt and pressed it against the wound. It was a bullet graze, deep but clean. She was burning up. Her wrists were raw like she'd been tied. Her boots were gone, and her right cheek bore the shadow of a man's handprint, bruised purple. Colt said nothing. He lifted her gently, like she was something sacred and broken, and carried her back across the prairie while Bristle trotted ahead. It was 3 days before she woke fully. Colt kept her in the back room, dark and cool, fed her broth and rainwater, changed the bandage twice a day. He didn't speak unless she asked. She didn't ask much. When her voice came, it was sandpaper soft. "My name's Myra." Colt just nodded. He was whittling a bit of oak into a hook for the barn door. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, showing old burns and inked names. Myra looked at him from the cot, her face unreadable. "You the one that found me?" "No," he said. "Dog did." Myra blinked. Her lashes were crusted from sleep. "Thought I was dead." "You almost were." She swallowed. "How long?" "Week, give or take." She nodded, slow. "Where am I?" Colt poured a cup of water and handed it to her. "Outskirts, near Dustbridge Canyon, ranch land, mine." Myra looked down into the water, then back at him. "I can work when I'm better. Don't want to be no debt." "You're not." Still, her eyes stayed on him. Something wary there, not fear, not yet, just the animal kind of watchfulness that comes from being hunted. She sipped the water, her hands shaking. Colt didn't ask what happened, not then. That night the wind howled up off the basin and slammed the shutters so hard they cracked. Bristle paced the porch, hackles up. Colt sat inside cleaning his rifle. Myra stood barefoot by the hearth, a wool blanket around her shoulders. She hadn't said much all day, but now she spoke. They thought I'd die out there. Colt looked up. Who? She hesitated. 3 men, one called Danner. The others I didn't know. Colt set the rifle down. Why, they leave you alive. I shot one, then I ran. He didn't press further. Myra turned away, eyes fixed on the fire. I didn't mean to kill him. He grabbed me. Said I was promised. Colt's brow twitched. Promised. She nodded once, bought more like. Pa traded me off to settle his whiskey debt. Danner runs the land back east of Cold Knife. They call it a ranch, but it's not. It's a prison. For girls. Colt stood slow. How long were you there? 3 weeks, long enough. Silence settled like dust. Bristle scratched at the door. Myra turned her face to the flame again. I'd rather die on the prairie than go back. Colt looked at her a long time. Then he said, You won't. That was the first promise. The wind howled, the night held, the fire burned down to coals. And outside, under a sliver of dying moon, the dog sat sentry, ears flat, watching the dark for what would come. The next morning, Myra fed the chickens. She moved stiff, favoring her side where the bullet had raked her, but she didn't ask for help. Colt watched her from the barnyard, arms folded, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. She didn't know he was watching, or maybe she did and didn't care. Her braid hung like a wet rope down her back. Her bare feet sunk into the cool dirt. Bristle trailed her like a shadow. Colt didn't say a word as she scattered the feed, pausing to rub the ear of the lame hen. Her mouth stayed tight, her eyes unreadable. But she worked like she'd been doing it her whole life. She stayed, no talk of leaving, no mention of where she'd come from, no questions about Colt's life or the house or what lay beyond the canyon. She slept in the back room, kept her own bandages clean, and only cried once, silently in the barn when she thought no one was near. He heard it through the slats, one sharp sob like something catching on barbed wire, then nothing. By the second week, she was walking upright and skinning potatoes in the kitchen. She didn't flinch when Colt passed behind her, didn't startle when he spoke, but she still didn't trust anyone's silence. If he sat quiet too long, she'd glance over her shoulder like waiting for something to land. You ever have a dog? Colt asked one evening while mending tack. Myra nodded. Cattle Mutt died when I was 12. Name was Holler. What happened? Pa sold him for a jug of corn liquor. Colt didn't respond. Bristle lay curled near the hearth, nose twitching in his sleep. She set down the knife and wiped her hands on her apron. I liked the dog more than my brother. More than Pa sometimes. I think that dog was the only thing God ever gave me that was mine. Colt met her gaze. She didn't look away. That was the first time she held it, his gaze. 3 nights later, someone rode past the ranch line. Colt heard the hoofbeats long before the rider showed. He stood in the dark, rifle in hand, watching the rise where the sagebrush broke. The moon was full, so it cast a silver line across the field, and the rider paused just long enough to let the light catch the edge of his coat. Then he turned and rode on. Colt stayed on the porch until dawn. In the morning, Myra was waiting by the gate. They're looking, she said. Colt nodded once. That wasn't a local. No. You recognize him. She didn't answer. Her face was pale, but not with fear. She didn't spook. She stiffened. Colt watched her for a long moment. I'll teach you to shoot. The days turned harder. Myra worked the land like she had something to prove. She learned to milk, to ride, to reset a fence post when the cattle knocked it down. Colt never had to show her anything twice. She was stubborn and she hurt quietly. That made her dangerous in time. She took to shooting like she'd been born to it. By the second month, she was hitting tin plates at 30 paces. She cleaned the revolver better than Colt did. She watched the dust line like a hawk. The girl who'd begged a dog not to leave her in the canyon was gone. What remained was something quieter, thinner, sharper. One night, Colt caught her out near the paddock under a black sky, eyes wide open, pointing the rifle at nothing. "You waiting for them?" "No," she said. "I'm remembering." He didn't ask what. He didn't need to. Winter came sudden that year. Snow crept in before the leaves even fell, and the nights got cold enough to crack the pump handle. Colt patched the roof while Myra split wood until her hands blistered. They didn't speak much, but the silence no longer felt hollow. It was a peace made of shared labor, of breath and fire and the scrape of boots on frozen ground. One night by the stove, Myra said, "When I was small, my mama told me a story about a dog that found her in a river when she was near drowned. Said the dog dragged her up the bank and stood guard all night till help came." Colt glanced at Bristle. "You believe it?" "I do now." She reached down and touched the dog's head. Bristle didn't stir. "Maybe it's God's way," she said. "Not saving people, just sending dogs." Colt didn't answer. He looked at the fire, jaw tight. She rose and went to her room. He stayed at the stove until the coals turned black. In late January, a rider came again. This one didn't stop. He left a mark. An old whiskey bottle hung on the fence post with a strip of leather tied round the neck. Colt cut it down and brought it in. Myra stared at it for a long while. "It's Danner's brand," she said. "He the one who put the bullet in you." She nodded. "He don't shoot to kill right off. He plays with things." Colt dropped the bottle into the stove. The leather burned fast, the glass slower. "What happens when he comes himself?" "I don't know," she said, "but he'll try. Then we'll be ready." She looked up at him. Her hands trembled just once. "Don't let him take me." "I won't." He said it like an oath. Like he'd been waiting to make it for longer than he'd known her. Outside, the wind howled again, tearing through the prairie like a warning. Bristle growled low in his sleep. Inside, the fire burned bright, and neither of them moved from it. By February, the creeks had frozen solid, and the trees stood like bones against the sky. Myra took to wearing Colt's old sheepskin coat. It dragged behind her like a cloak, the hem stained with mud and ash. She still limped slightly, but her eyes were clearer than ever. The girl who had once bled into the dust didn't speak of pain anymore. She spoke of traps, of firewood placement, of distances between rifle shots. They made plans without calling them such, reinforced the barn doors, dug a root cellar wide enough to hide two people, stocked with salt meat and dry biscuit. Colt taught her to reload by feel. Myra taught herself how to walk without sound. Each night they took turns on watch. Bristle always stayed with her. One morning she said, "What if he don't come for me? What if he just burns the place down?" "He won't," Colt said. "Danner likes to touch what he owns. And I ain't his." "No, you're not." She watched him a long time, then nodded. Later, while cleaning her rifle, she whispered, "Not anymore." They saw the smoke 2 weeks later, south of the ridge. A narrow line rising up like a thread drawn from the earth. It didn't belong to them. Colt watched it from the rise above the pasture. He counted the distance. It wasn't close enough for concern, not yet, but it was too close to ignore. "They'll scout first," he said. "Then they'll test." "How many will he bring?" "He'll keep the girl snatchers close, probably 3 or 4. The rest'll stay hidden." Myra's jaw tightened. "He'll want to take me breathing." Not if you're aiming back. She didn't answer. Her fingers brushed the scar on her hip. That night, Colt opened the chest he kept beneath the floorboards. Inside lay his old war gear, wrapped in oilcloth. A pair of revolvers, long-barreled and heavy, a carbine with a scorched stock, extra rounds, a Confederate buckle dulled with time, and at the bottom a yellowed telegram with a name scratched out. He handed her one of the revolvers. "It's heavy," she said. "You'll carry it anyway." She nodded. He watched her run her thumb along the iron like it was a thing alive. "You ever shoot a man square?" he asked. "No, just once when I ran." "Hurts more after." "I hope so." He didn't tell her she was wrong. Some truths were better left to come hard. Snow fell again on the third night after the smoke, thick and soundless, muting the earth. Myra lay awake, rifle beside her. She tied her hair back with a leather thong, and her boots were tucked beneath the bed for quick reach. She dreamed of fire, of dogs barking, of hands on her throat. She woke to Bristle growling low. The window showed nothing, just snow, just dark, but Bristle didn't growl for nothing. Myra sat up and reached for the rifle. She moved silent across the floor, one step at a time, heart in her throat. She pressed to the wall, listening, a breath, outside, then another, faint but real. She turned and slipped into the hall. Colt was already standing at the door, shotgun in hand, bare-chested despite the cold. His eyes met hers and said everything. He cracked the door slow, just wide enough to see. A shape stood 10 yards off, not moving, just watching. Another stood farther back, on horseback. Myra brought the rifle up. Her hands were steady. The man nearest stepped forward, tall, wearing a duster slicked with ice. His beard was streaked gray. His voice, when it came, was smooth as syrup and twice as slow. "Evening, friend." Colt didn't answer. The man raised both hands. "Looking for something that belongs to me." "Don't see anything of yours here." "She's mine by trade." "Trade over." A pause. "Then it's war, I suppose." "No," Colt said, "it's justice." He shut the door. They didn't attack that night. They didn't need to. They wanted her afraid. Instead, Myra poured black coffee and sat at the table until dawn, cleaning her gun piece by piece. Colt watched her from the stove, his face carved from something older than anger. "They're testing you," he said. "They'll find I'm not soft." He nodded. "They will." The next morning, they found the doghouse burned. Bristle had been out hunting rabbits, and he came back howling. They didn't speak of it. They simply prepared. Colt nailed the windows shut. Myra dug another pit near the fence line, filled it with broken glass and wire. They lined the porch with dry kindling soaked in lamp oil. The land around the house grew scarred. She started wearing her pistol on her hip all hours. The coat hid it, but it was always there, just like the mark on her cheek. Just like the fire behind her eyes. One afternoon, she asked Colt if he believed in fate. "No." "Then why'd your dog find me?" "Luck." She shook her head. "Not luck." He looked up. Her eyes held something then, some terrible knowing. Some root pulled from the dark. "I think I was meant to bleed in that dirt, meant to be found, meant to burn something down in return." Colt studied her. She didn't blink. "Then you will," he said. That was the second promise. The wind carried a crow's cry across the canyon. Bristle stood in the doorway, silent now, watching the horizon with his ears flat. The war hadn't come yet, but it was near. The day they killed the first one, the sun was high and merciless. Myra spotted him in the trees north of the paddock, crouched behind a split boulder with a spyglass glinting in his hand. She didn't shout. She didn't run. She dropped flat to her belly and crawled along the ridge Colt had dug into a blind. Bristle was already there, ears pinned, silent as stone. Colt joined her with the carbine. One look, and Myra whispered, "He's mine." Colt didn't argue. He handed her the rifle. The man leaned out to adjust the glass. He was young, thin. Probably sent ahead to measure the place. He never saw her. The shot cracked through the trees like a snapped bone. He folded back and went still. A crow rose from a branch nearby, then settled again. Myra watched the blood bloom in the snow. Then she exhaled. "That's one," Colt said. She wiped the scope clean. "No more warnings," she said. They dragged the body to the edge of the pasture and hung it from the old windmill by the ankles. A message meant to be seen. A cut rag stuffed into the man's mouth. A bullet casing pressed into his palm. Myra stood below it, arms crossed, hair pulled back tight. Colt watched her for a long moment before he spoke. "Most folks would be broken by now." She didn't look at him. "I was broken before. This is what's left of it." That night the first fire came. Brush lit near the barn, stoked with grease and bone-dry tinder. Colt was out before the smoke reached the porch. Myra was faster. She threw the bucket before he did, stamping out embers with a wet cloth wrapped round her boots. Flames licked the side of the hayloft, but they didn't catch. When the wind shifted, Colt saw two riders vanish across the rise. "They're probing," Myra said. "No more of that." They spent the next day laying wire traps in the ravine, broken bits of horseshoe nailed to stakes. Trip lines set under snow. Colt reset the trigger on the bear trap behind the root cellar. Myra built her own kind of snare, chicken wire strung with cowbells under deadwood. The sound would carry across the canyon. She slept with the pistol under her hand now, bristle at the door. Danner came in person on the 6th day. He didn't ride up like a man with guns. He walked in with a white handkerchief and a smile and 4 men behind him. 2 of them had knives out. The other 2 had rifles slung low and cocked. Colt was waiting on the porch. Myra stood behind the doorway, rifle sight lined through a knot in the wood. Bristle crouched beside her, low and ready. Danner took off his hat as he approached, all slow grin and grease-slick hair. "Afternoon, March. You know why I'm here." "You're trespassing." "Come now," Danner said. "We're both men of reason." "No," Colt said. "I'm a man who doesn't bargain with slavers." Danner's smile didn't waver. "You keeping her here, feeding her, bedding her maybe. I call that theft. She's mine. Paperwork says so." "She's not property. World says different." "Then the world's wrong." Myra tightened her grip. Her breath didn't shake. Danner took a step forward. "Tell you what, I'll trade. 1 wagon load of cattle plus $50. You let her walk back on her own 2 legs, no fuss." "No," Colt said. Danner's eyes shifted. "She's promised," he said. "To me, by her blood. She made new promises." Danner looked toward the door. "You inside there, girl?" Myra didn't answer. He raised his voice. "You think he'll die for you? Think that dog'll save you twice?" Myra stepped out, rifle raised. Cold, level eyes. "I don't need saving." Danner's smile cracked just a fraction. "You're playing a man's game." "No," she said. "I'm ending it." She pulled the trigger. The bullet clipped his cheek. Blood sprayed. He fell back shouting, and his men scrambled for cover. Colt's shotgun roared from the porch. 1 man dropped where he stood, chest torn open. Another screamed and fled. The other 2 returned fire, but Myra was already down behind the barrels, reloading fast. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, Danner and one of his men had vanished into the trees, leaving blood and smoke behind them. Colt caught one of the others crawling. He dragged him out by the collar and tied him to the fence post. Myra knelt beside him, eyes cold. "Tell him what you saw." The man spit blood. "She's his. She'll always be his." She looked him in the eyes. No. I was promised, she said, but not to him. She raised the pistol. Colt didn't stop her. She fired once, and the prairie went still again. They burned the bodies that night. Colt stacked the wood. Myra lit the flame. The smell carried across the canyon like a warning. When the fire died, they stood side by side, watching the coals pulse like a heart. "He'll be back," Colt said. "He'll bring more," Myra said. Colt nodded. "Then we finish it." She looked at him. Not soft, not scared, just steady. The dog brushed against her knee. That night they didn't sleep. They prepared. The thaw came sudden, ripping through the frost with hard rain and warmer winds that rolled off the southern flatlands. The snow turned to mud, the creeks began to run again, and the earth gave off the sour stench of wet blood where the fight had soaked it. Colts rusted if left out overnight. The fence sagged with weight, but Myra sharpened her knives anyway. She took the storm as a sign. Danner had vanished, but he wasn't gone, not the kind of man who slinks away after pain. The silence was part of his design, the lull before a deeper cut. She began wearing her pistol in plain view now, not hidden under coat or skirt. When the wind blew, it gleamed like a dare. The sight of it made the dog trail closer, watching every shape in the trees like it might lurch at them. One morning Colt woke to the smell of meat cooking and found her in the kitchen with a rabbit roasting and a map drawn in ash on the table. She'd sketched the canyon, the tree lines, marked points where a man might hide or spy or lay a fire line in the dark. "Every way in has a way out," she said. Colt nodded, still groggy. "You expecting him tonight?" "I want him to." She didn't say more, she didn't need to. The next days were filled with preparation that looked like madness to anyone not born for war. She took Colt's dynamite caps and buried them in glass jars beneath the slope south of the barn, wired to nails driven through old cooking pans. She cleaned the rifle 3 times in one night, dismantling it by lantern, the dog asleep at her feet. Her hair was always tied back now, sleeves rolled high, the muscles in her forearms hardened into knots. When Colt watched her, he no longer saw the girl bleeding in the dust. He saw something remade in silence. One night, sitting on the roof under a purple sky, she said, "Do you believe in hell?" Colt didn't answer right away. "I've seen places like it." She stared out over the trees. "I think I was already there," she said. "He just dragged it into the daylight." Colt reached into his coat and took out a folded scrap of paper. Old, creased. He held it out. She hesitated, then took it. It was a telegram, one line. "Civils dead stop. No survivors stop. They took her stop." Myra looked up at him. "Who?" "My wife and our girl." Silence passed between them like a long breath. "I was gone 3 days," Colt said. "Came back to smoke and bones. Sheriff called it raiders. Never found them." Myra folded the telegram and handed it back. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "I'm not anymore." "Why?" "Because it led me to this. They didn't touch, they didn't move, but something shifted. Like steel tempered by fire." The final warning came at dusk in the form of a riderless horse. It galloped in from the east, eyes wild, flanks foaming. A rag was tied around its neck, a strip of Myra's old dress. The one she'd been wearing the day Bristle found her. She watched it without blinking. "They're ready," she said. "They want you to break." "I want them to come." She saddled her mare, checked the rifle one more time, filled her coat with extra rounds. Colt strapped on both pistols and laid the shotgun by the door. He checked the fuses on the caps and loaded the carbine. They didn't speak again that night. At midnight, the bells sang. Cowbells wired to the trees gave a sudden clang. Then another, then silence. Myra stepped outside with the wind in her hair, rifle raised, breath calm. Colt followed. Bristle led them to the lower ridge. The moon lit the prairie in silver. Nothing moved. Then came the whine of horses, low and urgent, figures, 6, maybe more, moving slow along the edge of the creek bed just beyond the snares. Myra knelt behind the gatepost and took aim. Colt whispered, "Not yet." They waited. One of the men moved into the line marked by white stone. Myra fired. The shot ripped through his neck, dropped him where he stood. Another stepped into a trap. A spring line cracked, snapping bone, shouts. Then came the return fire, wild, angry, slamming into the posts and dirt and house wall. Wood exploded in splinters, glass shattered. Colt fired once, twice. Another fell. Then came Danner's voice. "Come out, girl. Come out and we'll end it clean." Myra rose from cover. "I am out," she shouted. Gunfire cracked. She dropped again, rolled and fired. Another man screamed. The land lit up in flashes. The barn caught. Flames leapt up, licking skyward. Danner moved through it like a revenant, eyes glowing, pistol in one hand, whip in the other. "You were mine," he said. "No," Myra replied. She shot him once. The bullet hit his shoulder, spun him back. Colt stepped out of the shadows behind him. "Twice now," he said. "You've aimed at what's not yours." Danner turned too slow. Colt fired. The first round hit center chest. The second clipped his jaw. He dropped to his knees. Myra stepped forward, smoke rising behind her. "You don't get to die easy," she said. Danner laughed, bloody foam spilling from his mouth. "You were nothing," he gasped. "A debt, a sack of bones." "And you were dust," she said. "You just didn't know it yet." She put the pistol to his head and pulled the trigger. The dog barked once, then fell silent. By dawn, the fire was out. 4 bodies burned with it. The rest fled. Colt stood beside the ashes with his coat around her shoulders. She held the pistol in both hands. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. The wind moved over the prairie like a sigh. And in the far distance, across the creek and the ridge in the dark soil still wet with death, no one came. No one dared. Spring came slow, dragging its feet like a tired animal, the air thawed by inches. The mud dried in streaks. The creek ran clearer. Grass poked through where ash once lay, as if even the land forgot what had happened. But Myra remembered. She moved through the days like someone who had survived a shipwreck and never quite left the sea. The scar on her hip had hardened into a rope of raised skin. The bruises on her cheek had faded to pale smudges, but the look in her eyes hadn't softened. She still rose early, patrolled the fence line with Bristle at her heel, checked the rifle at breakfast. Only now she smiled sometimes, only when she thought no one was looking. Only when Colt said nothing, but stood close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. The land had stopped screaming. The house still bore its wounds, a scorched corner of the barn, a shattered window patched with oiled paper. Bullet holes like moth bites along the porch rail, but they didn't mend them all at once. They lived among them, letting the ghosts have their space. Some scars weren't meant to be covered. Colt built her a forge out by the edge of the yard. Not a big one, just enough to fix tools, maybe shape iron into something clean. He handed her the hammer one morning and didn't say a word. She looked at it like it was a Bible or a sword or maybe both. She took it. By midsummer she was mending hinges and shaping nails. Her hands toughened, shoulders roped with lean muscle. She spoke more now, though not much. When she laughed, it was low and dry, like gravel sliding in a riverbed. It never lasted long. One evening she asked, "You think folks'll ever come out here again?" "Maybe," Colt said, "but not to take." "Good," she said. She looked over the ridge. They buried girls on Danner's land, some without names. "We can give 'em names," Colt said. She nodded, one by one. So they did. In late June, a boy wandered onto the ranch. barefoot, sunburned, maybe 12, carried nothing but a sack with a broken canteen and a knife he didn't know how to hold. Said he ran from a mine up north, said he'd been whipped, said his brother died in the shaft. Colt watched the boy while Myra brought him water. When the boy flinched at her touch, she didn't pull away. She knelt and poured the water slow into his hands. He stared at her. "You gonna send me back?" "No," she said, "not here." That night he slept in the barn. By morning he'd saddled a mule and offered to mend fence. Colt taught him how. Myra gave him a new name. He kept it. Others came later, not many, just enough to matter. A woman with a dead eye and a child on her hip. A man who spoke in half phrases and couldn't sleep indoors. A girl who didn't speak at all but took to carving wood like it was breathing. They came wounded, used up, unwanted. They stayed. No one asked permission. No one tried to lead. Myra and Colt just made space. The forge turned into a shed. The shed turned into a hall. The pastures grew again. Wild grass, black soil strong. Colts were born, fences rebuilt. The ash was buried deep. And the prairie whispered quieter now. Not peace, not exactly, but something close. One night, near the edge of August, Colt found Myra standing barefoot in the yard, dress soaked from the waist down, watching the lightning roll along the rim of the world. "You ever think about what comes after?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "I used to," she said. "Not anymore." "Why not?" "Because this is it." He stepped beside her, not close, just enough to share the sky. "You remember when I said I didn't believe in fate?" She smiled a little. "I remember. I think I was wrong." She turned to him. Lightning lit her face pale gold, wind pushing her hair back. She looked older, not in years, but in weight. "Bristle found you," Colt said, "not by chance." She nodded. "No. Not chance." They didn't say anything more. The storm passed overhead without breaking. Bristle died in the fall, no warning, just lay down by the chicken coop and didn't rise. Myra found him at dawn, curled like he was sleeping. She sat beside him a long time, hands folded in her lap, not crying. When Colt came out, she said only, "He saw me first." They buried him on the ridge, facing west, carved a small stone. "Bristle, guardian free." She planted wild sage over the grave. It took. Years passed and no one spoke Danner's name again. But when strangers came asking about the girl who once survived a canyon, who lit a man's skull on fire with her eyes, they were told a simple thing. She lives on a ranch where no man raises a hand uninvited, where girls carry knives and dogs don't bark without reason, and where a cowboy's dog once found a dying girl in the dust and knew before any of them. She was the one they were waiting for. She was the bride the land had promised, and now she walks it free.